I want to provide content that's going to help empower your healing and freedom journey when it comes to your thinking. And I think in order to do this, we have to talk about the fear factor. I can't mention this enough. And I think it's important for each of us to ask ourselves in a sober way, not a condemning way, not beating ourselves up, but just understanding, is fear dominating our thinking? Because this was a major area of recognition in my life and my journey. Because at first I was overwhelmed with obsessive thinking, anxiety that was constant. It would spiral into panic attack level kind of stuff. And the list goes on and on into other things. And as I began to navigate, okay, I need help. I need to work through the issues of my life. I recognized that fear was a dominant influence in my thinking, in my behaviors, in how I related to other people. And what I noticed is that as I began to share this, whether somebody struggled with intense anxiety or not, I looked around and realized everybody to some degree has areas of fear that are overtaking patterns of thinking and wanting to have a high level of influence in how they think. Now, we can try to function and navigate our way through it, or we mask over stuff, but fear has a way of wanting to get into so many areas of our thinking, and it's very contagious because once it has a work in your thinking, it spreads in how you interact with others. Fear has a very contagious component to it. So I realized in my life, at first I wanted to say, God, help me with this anxiety. But I had to first realize that the problem isn't the problem. There's deeper things that I need to be willing to address in my life. And once I said, okay, God, I'm willing to take the journey, it was eye-opening how much fear had influenced so many areas of how I think, of what I focus on, how I behave, how I perceive the world around me. There's so much going on today in people with their feelings of unrest. There's so much disagreement, fighting. There's battles going on with people. There's this sense of lack of safety people feel, and they're troubled. And what we're needing to realize is that when it comes to our thoughts, it's not so much the thought that is creating trouble. It's the emotional fuel behind it. Like, you can talk about many different subjects, navigate many areas of your life. But when fear is the influence, it's going to lead us on a trail that's not going to be empowering. And I had to realize for my life, when fear takes over a thought pattern, it's not going to go in a good direction. The problem is fear is very loud. Feel it, it's anxious, it's disturbing, and so we feel prone to listen to it. To use a even stronger term, obey it. We often want to obey our fears. Then we can often get into camps where we divide up our fears. No, this fear, I know this is irrational, but this fear, Mark, is a real fear. Interestingly enough, your body doesn't know the difference and responds that way anyways. And I would exhort us to say, nowhere in the Bible does it say that we're to anxiously be afraid of anything. There is no like, oh, this is a good one to be afraid of. In fact, the commands and exhortation of the scriptures over and over again are do not be afraid. Do not fall into the fear pattern, because it wants to draw you in, to lure you in. And there's a contagious effect of people's narratives, their beliefs, their conversations, so filled with fear, when in reality, God designed our relationships to build up our faith, to build up our hope, to build our sense of love, using our words to recalibrate us back to God is faithful, He's here, He's with us. And so I had to realize over 15 years ago that as I said, okay, I'm going to enter a new level of a healing and freedom journey, because I realized I wasn't really dealing with I was chasing symptoms. I wasn't dealing with the root issues of my life. And I just felt this exhortation rise up in my heart. Deal with your current fears. Deal with the current issues. Face them. Let God meet you in them. Work through them. Let that be the area where God is building your life and your journey, because it will prepare you for the future. You see, preparing for the future is not being afraid of the future, projecting into the future, worrying about the future. That's not preparing for the future. Preparing for the future is dealing with what's right in front of you and learning to let God set you free from a fear-based perspective. It's not going to happen overnight. It's a journey. And so I invited myself to take the journey because I realized there's an invitation with God who's saying he's willing to walk with us and take us on a journey where we face fears layer by layer, work through them, empower us with his love, to shift our hope, to heal our hearts, because our hearts are in such desperate need of the kind of love that casts out fear. But then as I began to share this message many years ago and began to passionately exhort the body of Christ, I was like, who wouldn't want to be free in more ways, right? And then I realized that many people didn't want to dive into this issue. They didn't want to get uncomfortable. They didn't want to face the things that they just kind of, suppressed for so long, right? They didn't want to heal of issues and hurts and wounds. They didn't want to deal with those uncomfortable things. And we were actually afraid of dealing with what we're afraid of, right? Because when fear gets a hold of a subject, it just gives us trouble and gets us lost in spirals. And so I had to work through that there were areas that I didn't admit. Yeah, fear's dominating the narrative. So again, we can have a lot of thoughts fly by, but when we're afraid, when fear drives the thoughts, that's where it's going to want to lead us into a dark, disempowered kind of pathway. Fear is a very strong motivator, has a very, very loud voice. And so I stopped defending my fears and I said, God, I want to invite you into my fears. That's cool. That's helpful. That's empowering. Because we want, God, take it away, right? We try that. And we go, God, help me figure out what's going on. We obsess over the subject. We spin. And we want God to jump into our spinning with us, whatever thing we're on. And God's like, no, it's the fear that I want to begin to heal you from. I remember when I was teaching my son how to swim. And I remember we were in some shallower water at the beach, and he was trying to learn how to move his arms and stuff like that. And he all of a sudden started panicking. And as he's waving his arms and flailing around, and he's like kind of calling out to me, Dad, almost to the sense like, I'm drowning. Well, as he's flailing his arms and screaming, he can't see the words and hear them out of my mouth that I'm telling him. And I just kept repeating it over and over again. And the words, he just didn't get to them until finally I got right in his eye line and said, Max, stand up. See, he was lost in I'm drowning. And I was just telling him, stand up. And literally he put his feet down and went, oh. He didn't realize he could actually stand in the water. It's interesting how fear will work in that way. We're flailing, and we're spinning about God over these issues, our finances, our thoughts, or these things. And God's going, stand up. We can't hear it because we're the waves and we're screaming out, and we're wanting God to jump into our screaming. And God's not afraid. God doesn't have fear in his life, in his existence. So we're trying to pull him in, and he's bringing back to us, stand up. And see, we need that exhortation in our hearts. So this is the day, the time, the hour for us to actually begin standing. And then when you've stand and you're exhausted, the Bible says when you've done all to stand. To stand in the midst. We can talk about what's going on in the news. We could talk about what's happening in our world, but we don't have to serve fear in the midst of it. And this is something that we all have to come to terms in our own hearts. It's not something that you can just tell people and shove it on them. Stop being afraid. What's the matter with you? We've said that, but really what happens is each of us needs to come to terms with how fear has motivated our life and our perception. Because as the times move on, what's increasing nowadays? A sense of unknown, uncertainty, a sense of hope of what we hope won't happen. That begins to rise. And so our responses can often be to control, find certainty. We dive into the issues or the subject and we want to make them like okay. And we think that's the solution. And God's calling us in the midst of unknown and uncertainty to dive deeper into what it means to be loved by him. For many of you, you spiral in constant what ifs, and it's just keeping you from stepping forward and moving forward in your faith because you're always checking. You're always what if. Makes you double-minded, makes you all over the place. You're in cycles of worry, you're in spinning. And you're frustrated because you're talking to God about your what ifs and spinning in the subject. And he is saying the problem is not the problem. That's not the issue. The issue is learning what it means to be safe in my love for you. And so many people write to me, and what they're looking for is quick fixes to the subject, quick fixes to their discomfort. How about you take a deep breath and say, okay, today is a day of decision. And what's the decision? Many of you, the breakthrough just surrounds a single decision. That enough is enough. I don't want to serve fear anymore. Now, that's not like you make a decision and light bulbs just all of a sudden turn on and everything just changes overnight. No, what decision does is it moves your compass into a new direction. And I want to encourage, as you move that compass, you know what, folks? We're going to be honest about what our fears are. We're going to be honest about the things that trouble us. And we're going to create safety amongst each other, that we all, every single one of us, you, me, everyone, have areas of fear that God is working in our lives to heal us and set us free from and walk with us through it. But it's a journey. It's going to lead us on a journey. And as we learn his nature and allow that to become a more reality, it drives out the work of fear in our lives. But creating areas of safety where we can say, you know what? We've all got fear issues, but we're all making decisions. We don't want to serve it, defend it, make it a permanent part of our value system, because God's not given us a spirit of fear. And he is leading us to learn how to be loved and let that love drive out the fear. You may feel fear, but you don't have to serve it. You may feel it rising up with you. And God will take you on a journey. You're going to learn, like, what are the value systems that drive those fears? Some of it leads back to childhood. Some of it you've carried your whole life. You've known nothing else but to be afraid. You may learn about how you've been self-protective, hypervigilant. You may learn, okay, I've had trauma in my life that reinforce that fear, and I'm living out of that, and I need some healing work in that. It may be recognizing the home you grew up in, your parental influences in your life, what it looks like to relate to God, maybe how you were taught to relate to God needs some healing and some restoration, right? Those things will show up as you're hungry, humble, and teachable, as you allow yourself and say, I'm going to make a decision. I'm not going to serve fear any longer. And I'm going to be open to realizing where fear has had an influence in your life. Because as I became aware, I was like, look at, when I wake up in the morning, when I go to bed, throughout the day, I'm just clocking in what fear says about a given thought. No wonder it's a struggle to latch onto what God thinks, because fear takes over. So sometimes I have to say to people, what would you do if fear wasn't in the equation? What would this subject look like if fear didn't dominate the narrative? It's no longer a fearful issue. What would it look like? Because fear really takes us out of even dealing what we actually need to deal with. But for many of you, the decision goes back. It can be a one-time decision, but it's repeated every day. I'm not going to serve fear anymore. I'm going to move in a new direction. And I'm willing to take the journey. And that is what I am all about, is teaching people about journey living. It's not a destination. It's not a quick fix. It's a journey, whether it's anxiety, panic attacks, phobias, OCD, whether it's depression, whether it's just everyday fears, it's financial fears, it's marriage fears, it's fear over your kids, the world, news events, whatever it is, whatever subject seems to take a lot of time in your thinking. Let's invite God to be a part of that, so that fear doesn't have to be the dominant motivator. It doesn't have to capture the narrative. I want to encourage you, if this is speaking to your heart, get my book, I Will Not Fear. This is a real heart connected passion of mine to address this issue. It hits very close to home in my journey and what I've discovered and what I've learned. If what I'm sharing today is a blessing to your life and your journey, go to markdejesus.com. You can go to that website, and there's a free ebook you can get. There's free materials, amazing articles and videos I just love putting together to provide insights for your healing and freedom journey. Also, consider a one-time donation or become a regular subscriber and partner. But I pray this is a blessing to your life and your journey, and just wanted to take a few moments to let you know you may have fear working in your life, but you don't have to serve it, and it doesn't have to be a permanent part of your life. Take the journey. God bless you.